All right. Well, I am here with Karla, and I'll just have you introduce yourself. My name's Christy, and we are going to have a discussion about being a dreamer and a DACA recipient. So Karla, tell us a little bit about yourself. What's your story? Where do you live, etc.?
Hi, Christy. So, as you said, I'm Karla. I live in Toledo, Ohio, and I have lived here for about 18 years. Yes, oh my goodness. I came here when I was 11 years old, and I'm originally from Peru. My whole family is from Peru. I only have one sister, so it's my parents, my sister. We all came here in 2001, right after September 11, which was a very scary time. And yeah, so we've been here since then.
That is a scary time. Way to be brave and come here then. And what do you do now, Karla?
So right now I am working in the talent acquisition firm in Maumee, which is about 20 minutes from where I live. But yeah, that's what I do now.
Nice. And so part of the reason we're having this call for people who don't know is there's a Supreme Court decision coming up in the next week or two, possibly,
Yeah.
about DACA. Could you explain what DACA is, and then for you as a DACA recipient, what it has meant to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So DACA is a program that was put on, it was an executive order by President Obama. He gave the decision on in the summer of 2012. And the reason why I remember so clearly, it's because it changed my life completely. So what DACA does is that it gives a work permit as well as a temporary legal status to kids that came into the country. So it's pretty much for anybody who came to the country between the ages, I believe, of from a baby, I think. Yeah, from a baby until you were 16. And then in the process, there are a million stories, but in the process, they became undocumented. So in my case, I became undocumented after 3 months of being here. But I was a kid, so I didn't really know what was going on. Yeah, and so I guess a little bit of my background is that we moved here from Peru because the economy was just so terrible in Peru. My dad's a chemical engineer and my mom's a preschool teacher, and they're also pastors. But they just, for different reasons, they had to stop pastoring and in Peru, and they couldn't find jobs as their profession. And so my dad is also a musician, and he made the decision. So he traveled a lot before, and he made the decision to move here without really understanding a lot of what goes into, moving to a different country. But, his main reasoning was that my mom and my sister and I had to survive. And so he literally gave up everything and started working here as a porter. So just like cleaning, buildings and everything. Yeah, so, wow, I don't think I've ever said that out loud. So, but.
The hero to do so much for his family.
Yeah. Yeah.
Such a humble way with an engineering background and a pastor's background.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, and of course, even like the language barrier. So my dad in university, he studied English, but even then, there's a difference between studying a language and having to speak it all the time. So, yeah, so when I moved here, my dad had been here for a year before my mom, my sister, and I moved here. I moved here and I didn't speak any English. Which is wild to think about. Yeah, and so since then we've been a part of the Toledo community. But yeah, so when DACA happened, I had been undocumented for about 11 years.
Oh.
And at this point, I was 22. And so I had graduated high school. I graduated high school with 60 college credits or so because of the high school that I went to, which was a miracle in itself, you know. And so, but I remember, you know, realizing that it was going to be really hard for me to go to school after high school, and not being able to drive and not being able to work, you know. And so, and my parents were incredible, you know, they never made me feel like I was, you know, like taking up space. They knew that I couldn't legally work. And so I did a lot of internships, a lot of social work internships, which is really interesting, because I did not go into social work.
Maybe someday the Lord will have a plan for that.
Yeah. And so, but I loved it. I learned, you know, I helped translated a lot of documents that were used in court for women who were in the middle of court cases for like domestic abuse and, you know, like sexual assault. And so I learned a lot about the different communities in Toledo, because a lot of the projects that we worked on were on, you know, like getting grants and everything to help people. And so, yeah, so it was just like a really interesting time because I couldn't work, but I would work like 40 hours a week, technically, sometimes, you know. I just wasn't getting
allowed to be paid for it because of your salary. How early did you know you were undocumented?
I think I realized there were a couple of times. So we'd been here for 2 years when one of my uncles, who, especially the year that my dad moved countries, he became like our dad. You know, if we needed anything, we'd call him, and he ended up getting cancer. And but by this time we were already in the U.S. and we couldn't go back to see him. You know? And so I was 13 years old. I remember exactly where I was when I found out that he had passed away. And, you know, and like knowing that we couldn't go back, because if we went back, we couldn't come back here. And so that was maybe like the first time where I was like, oh, like something is wrong. And then I turned 15, and, you know, in Latin America, traditionally there's quinceañeras. So I wanted to have a quinceañera, but then I didn't want to have it here. I wanted to have it with my family, you know, like my cousins, my grandparents.
People in Ohio don't understand quinceañeras.
Yeah, and so I, you know, I remember like having those conversations with my parents of saying like, we can't go back, we have to decide, you know. And so again, we stayed. Yeah. And then another big moment was when it was time for, I was a senior in high school, and it was time to apply for universities and scholarships and grants and loans. And I couldn't do any of them. Yeah.
That's so painful. So painful.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, I, you know, like those are big moments, especially as a teenager, where I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Did you have a quinceañera in the end here?
I ended up having a very similar kind of party, but when I was 18.
Okay. Oh, shoot. Some of my family are Mexican, and my cousins had quinceañeras, so I was always a little jealous of them as the white cousin that I didn't have this gigantic pseudo wedding celebration with all the gifts as a 15-year-old.
That's so funny. I know. I love going to quinceañeras.
They're amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you feel about the upcoming Supreme Court decision? So I guess for those who are unfamiliar with it, when the Trump administration made an order to cancel DACA, it got fought in the courts with a series of lawsuits, and it's made its way all the way to the Supreme Court. And in the autumn, they heard arguments about whether or not it was allowed to be canceled. And we've just been waiting for the last few weeks. Any day now, they could give their decision about whether or not to rescind DACA and take away this provision that Karla has. And so how are you feeling about this upcoming Supreme Court decision?
Yeah, so maybe a little anxious, if I'm being honest. because so in 2016, I reapplied for my DACA, and there was a delay with the immigration offices. And so for 3 months, I didn't get my renewal. Like I didn't get my renewal on time. And so I lost my job for 3 months, but gladly my company took me right back, you know? However, I don't know what will happen this time around if, you know, if something happens, just because, because I guess I didn't answer a little bit of, you know, like what has DACA done for me, but with DACA, I was able to go back to school. I was able to get a job officially. Yep. You know, and yeah, and also just being able to, you know, like to help people financially, because we, you know, like we do support a lot of our family members back in Peru as well. You know, some of them are elderly and, you know, are no longer even working. So yeah, so DACA just changed my life completely. It allowed me to travel the US. And I love national parks. They're my favorite thing. Say that again.
You have a favorite national park?
So far, I would say Sequoia National Park in California. But I'm dying to go see Zion.
Oh yeah, I have neither. So
yeah, so I, you know, like even that idea, I was able to visit some family for the first time in so long. I've met so many people because I've been able to travel and, you know, and do ministry and so many things. So, but yeah, and so that, you know, like that could change my life. And so I've already experienced DACA being taken away from me for 3 months. And it was terrible. You know, like I wanted to.
Or what happened with your job when it was taken away?
I had to leave my company. And gladly, there were positions open again when I received my permit again. But I had to leave my my company. It was right after the 2016 election. There was just a lot going on, and it was a bit of like, you know, like depression, and too because a lot of and maybe this misses the conversation and goes a little bit sideways, but the mental health of undocumented immigrants is really, it's something that gets missed in the conversation a lot. And so, and I've experienced depression before because of my immigration status, you know, as a teenager. And so it was like, almost like all coming back, you know, like, oh my gosh, like what's going to happen? How am I going to provide? And all these things. And you know, like,
so vulnerable.
Yeah, you know, and I did have a lot of my friends who showed up for me, and it was incredible to see, you know. But yeah, this time around, we're just waiting in the Supreme Court, and because they never gave an exact day on when they would make a decision, you know, and so every week it's like, so is this the week? Is this the day? And I'll never forget the day when Jeff Sessions gave the first notice that DACA was canceled. It was September 5th, I believe, of 2017. And I'll never forget that moment, you know, like I was like, I don't know what will happen. But I had already spent so much of my teens and even my early 20s where so much of the time felt like I was wasting my life away, you know, because I was like, I can't do anything that I want to do, or that I, you know, anything that's helpful. And so now I'm like, if this happens, I don't know what I will do, because, well, one, we're in the middle of a pandemic. But besides that, you know, like, do I have to just leave and leave, you know, my family, my friends, who, you know, like, I'm pretty much American. I'm Peruvian American. I'm not, you know.
Yeah.
So.
You've been here for nearly 20 years. That's a long time.
Yeah. And so I'm like, I don't know what will happen. So, yeah, you know, like kind of taking it day by day, and knowing that, and I have to trust in the Lord. You know, I'm putting my trust in the Lord that for 18 years, he's taking care of me in this country.
Yeah.
you know? So, yeah, based on our record, I'm sticking with trusting the Lord, but it is still,
Yeah.
very unknown.
So we talked earlier before the call, like the recorded part of this call started, about your faith as a Christian and having worked for churches and, how you've experienced that as an immigrant. Is there anything that you would like the Christian community or the wider church community in the country to understand that they misunderstand right now when it comes to your situation or so many others, or things that you'd like to communicate to them that would be helpful for their growth?
Yeah, so I think recently, especially in recent years, so I read a lot of nonfiction books.
Me too.
Yeah. And so I'm always learning, it's always my goal to always learn new things and new perspectives. And in recent years, I realized that welcoming people and loving people, it's really not about whether they're right or wrong. It is very much, this is the second commandment, and
Wait, say that again. Say that again. Where's my microphone? I need like a mic drop moment.
Yeah, because when Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your soul, with all your heart, all your strength. And then he says, and the second is just like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. And it's not saying love your neighbor the way that you love your kids, the way that you love your spouse, the way that you love your best friend, is the way that you love yourself. And then he doesn't say, but only if they agree with you, or only if you think they're right, or, or only if you think, whatever, like A, B, C. He just says, love them as yourself.
There's just a period, a full stop at the end of that sentence.
Yeah, and so when I think of that, I think we've missed the mark in the way that we are loving our neighbor, because we are called, and a lot of the times it's like the conversation of unity, but we're called to unity, but we're not called to sameness. And so because of that, I want to love my neighbor who doesn't look like me, and I want to love my neighbor who doesn't have the same citizenship status as me, and yeah, in Jesus there is no shame and no condemnation, and so I want to love them shamelessly, and I want to love them without any condemnation.
How could Christians who are new to this subject, or who maybe have a very tough line on how they'd respond to somebody who's undocumented, what would it look like for them to love their neighbor, to love someone in your position? Like what would be things that would make you feel, or the wider community of immigrants feel cared about, do you think?
So I think, and this is something that can be like so small to think about, but even not using the word illegal is a big deal, because human beings cannot be illegal, and so because of that, and also if you look into the immigration system, it's actually not illegal to live here undocumented. It is a civil violation, which would be just like comparable to jaywalking,
Yeah.
Yep. And so
people don't know that. They think it's a felony, and it's not a felony.
Yep. And so, yeah, so that's number one. But also because it would be like somebody saying, what is one thing that they don't agree about you? Like it would be like saying, I'm trying to think like something that is comparable, but like you're putting my whole identity in one area of my life, you know? And my identity is in Christ, you know? And so that's like a big one. Even the language that we use is so important to bring honor to people, you know? And so that's one thing. Another thing is actually hearing our stories. A lot, especially now, a lot of people are putting out books, podcasts, YouTube videos. It's not as black and white. You know, they're like, it's not like this person is escaping this specific thing. There are so many stories, you know, and I always say, like, in my own story, I'm very privileged. I got here on an airplane that, you know, like took me straight to the Toledo airport. And I got to be with my dad and my mom all together, you know, like that is already
Sorry, I have spam calls that call me all day long. I'm in the Apple cult. They're all linked up. So when my phone rings, even though it's on mute, my stupid computer rings.
Yep, I get it.
The department can edit this out. Thanks, Karla.
But yeah, you know, and so oh, I lost my train of thought. We might have to add that too.
You were talking about how privileged you already are,
Yes.
that even your means of getting here was so much easier than some people.
Yes. So, you know, I have friends, even family members who have done very scary things to get here. And the thing is, like, we're not coming here like to take things. We're coming here because we need to provide for other people, you know? Or a lot of people are escaping from violence and from, you know, very scary things. So it's not like, you know, like, yeah, like we want to migrate. You know, a lot of the times it's like, we are losing a lot of things. We are leaving our cultures. We are leaving our food, our language, just to be in a safe place, you know?
Your food, by the way, is the best food in the world.
I cannot disagree with you.
I want to put that out there for folks who have not had Peruvian cuisine. There's nothing better. But also, you know, I'm being silly there. No, I'm not being silly. I'm ceviche.
I agree with you.
God bless my brother married a Peruvian, my sister-in-law. Thank you for joining our family, but also for but I think what you're bringing up about the loss. So just because you're here and you need to be here for various reasons that have pushed you here, you know, doesn't mean there's not a sadness at what you're leaving behind.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So this decision's coming up. What would be, in your opinion, the best possible outcome of the Supreme Court decision?
Whew, okay. Well,
no pressure.
I have very mixed feelings because while I do value DACA and, you know, it has changed my life, I cannot leave this conversation without acknowledging the 11 million people who are undocumented. And there are, I believe there was a Yale study or maybe a Princeton study that actually believes that there may be more than 20 million people who are undocumented. You know, and this involves people from all ages, in all groups, all, you know, I believe in the last studies that have been conducted, it is actually people from Asia who are at a higher rate becoming undocumented. And so, you know, like
a lot of Canadians that are undocumented. A lot of people don't realize white Canadians, there's a whole lot of them.
Yes, absolutely. You know, and so, yeah, so it affects, you might not even know, you know, but it might affect your neighbor, your literal neighbor, you know, and yeah, and so it's so complicated because a part of me wants to be like, yes, keep DACA, but also at the same time, I'm thinking, oh, but there are so many other people, and I would love, love, love to turn this conversation into immigration reform, you know, or to turn the conversation into not just the people who fell under DACA, but there are so many, because that is very specific to like a certain amount of years. So there are people who came here before that and after that who don't fit. You know,
have like more legal pathways so people can fix their status, get on the right side of the law, have an opportunity to be counted in the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially because, you know, I think there's also like the stereotype that the people that come here don't have an education, or, you know, like don't know anything or don't know the language. And well, that is absolutely a stereotype because it's a lie. You know, like I know so many people who have left professions, who speak the language like it's their first language, you know, and or who have never even, they don't even remember their country anymore, you know, because they're just American now. And so, yeah, you know, so I think there's a lot that goes into that, and how much, and even if you're looking, which I'm always like a little weary of talking about the economy, but if you're just looking at numbers, immigrants provide like billions of dollars in taxes. Imagine what else could be done if we actually had the right to work.
Yep. You know, I don't think you should avoid the economy conversation because, you know, I've been on this journey learning and understanding, you know, people's stories, how broken our immigration system is, and it's led me into looking at economics. And one of the facts I didn't know is that of the undocumented, 4 million undocumented members of our country opt in to pay income taxes through an ITIN number.
Yep.
So out of that 11 million, 4 million of them are saying, I don't get access to Medicaid, I don't get access to Social Security, but I'm paying into it by choice. And it also puts them in a vulnerable position where they're out and they're known to public officials who could deport them, but they're still choosing to pay income taxes. And I know that of those who are still more in the shadows, people would love a way to fix their status. And if even more people were paying an income tax, that would mean a lot to the whole country. And so I think, you know, it's these misconceptions and that's not even counting the buying power of those folks. And so the more I have learned, the more I've learned, you know, economically, it's a powerhouse for our country that we're already gaining from at people's expense. But we're not giving them the opportunity to be on the right side of the law. We're using them as a political pawn rather than seeing them as human beings made in God's image. You know, for me as a missionary, I care about this, but you know, people who are fellow believers in Christ, many who are undocumented. And like, am I seeing them, I like what you said earlier, through the lens of their identity as in Christ and not in their immigration status, but we don't always do that.
Yeah. And I think like, you know, as a Jesus follower, for me, like anytime, and not even just in immigration, but this happens a lot in immigration, anytime I take away from the image of God, I've already, you know, like I've already missed Jesus, you know, because the person right in front of me is the image of God, you know? And so, yeah, you know, that's just like as a Jesus follower.
No, I understand. So if we go to the broader immigrant community, how are others feeling right now with this upcoming decision? I know you can't represent all of them, but could you give us some highlights of what people are feeling?
Yeah, so, you know, as you said, I cannot represent the whole community, but it really is an interesting time because another thing that gets missed in this conversation is mixed status families. You know, and so, for example, my sister is a green card holder. However, I'm not. And so if anything happens, I might move back to Peru, but she's gonna stay, you know, but she's my sister. Yeah. And so there is a lot of, like family separation that could happen, that could come from this. A lot of, even like right now we're in the middle, and this is like specific to this time, but we're in the middle of COVID-19. And I believe it's 200,000 DACA recipients are considered essential workers. And that includes teachers, doctors, nurses, so many people. So yeah, so that is, another thing that is happening. And so there is a mixture of fear, of sadness, because you have to remember that immigrants already experience a great loss, and so family separation, even if it's not your, like your mom, dad, and in a lot of cases it is mom and dad, you already left something. And so there is that fear of having to leave something again. And there is a lot of trauma in that, that doesn't get discussed a lot. But imagine, I went to a conference at the University of Toledo last year, and the speakers were speaking about the mental health of undocumented immigrants specifically, and how studies are showing that immigrants with the fear of deportation are starting to show this like very similar responses to people who have PTSD, because there is that fear of like at any given moment, at any given moment, something could rapidly change, and it could be like detention center, or it could be, like full on deportation, or, any of those things. And so, like my family, we've had conversations of like, okay, like if one of us gets stopped, like what are we gonna do? Like what are the steps? Who are we calling? Like, and even like silly things like who has my social media passwords? Yeah.
Gotta check every box. Yep.
Yeah, so just like things like that. But and so there is just like a general fear of what is going on, Yeah.
That's painful. And so you kind of touched on this already, but what are important issues facing immigrant communities during the pandemic? One of the ones you said is DACA recipients are afraid of getting torn apart from their families, their lives, and then also a lot of them are in essential roles that the U.S. needs for the pandemic. We shouldn't be taking doctors away from the Cleveland Clinic, but we would if we took away DACA. Is there anything else you'd like to include that you haven't said already that is affecting the immigrant community, especially during COVID-19?
Yeah, absolutely. So, even with the famous stimulus checks, undocumented immigrants don't receive those. DACA recipients, I believe, did, because I did. However, not everyone in my family did. And then another thing that is happening, and that, like everybody like who is undocumented does not receive that. But also another thing that is happening is families who have mixed status, combinations. If one spouse can be a citizen, but if the other is not, then they are not getting any help from the government either.
Yeah.
But some of these are like families, like I'm a single woman, and I help my parents and my family in Peru, but I don't have to worry about, feeding all my kids.
Yeah. So that's the really challenging thing, because I think a lot of people miss that. Somebody said something a bit snide the other day to me about people being upset that undocumented people weren't getting these checks. And I really had wanted to explain to the person, but I didn't get the opportunity to. If a husband is American and born in the US and his wife is undocumented and they have 3 American born children, they got nothing, like zero check. And so if they were in an industry that got laid off because of this,
Yes.
you know, for some people, their stimulus checks were play money. They were bonus money because they were continuing to work. But for some people, you know, they're incredibly vulnerable, and the American members of the family get punished for having a mom or a dad that is undocumented. And people don't realize how difficult it is to fix your status even in marriage. And so that's another level of, you know, misunderstanding people have about the immigration system is people assume there's an easy way or a right way or a line to get into, but there's no line for so many people.
Yeah, absolutely. And even now, the current administration has blocked for 60 days the way to get a green card, you know? And so that's also happening for, for immigrants, unfortunately. Yeah, you know, there's just a lot of, and like you said, some people just can't work. A lot of people work in restaurants and construction. And then there are people who are still working who are considered essential workers, like migrant workers, who are literally putting food on our tables, and they are getting no help. And for, you know, if you look at the history, obviously, for many, many years, they've never gotten any help, but
we benefit by having fruits and vegetables on our table at prices we want to pay.
Yep, exactly.
Yep, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right. Oh, Karla, I could talk to you all day. Unfortunately, I'll probably stop the recording at some point, but is there anything else you would like to communicate, or any hopes or dreams, or before we
I mean, if anything, I just, you know, I would love to see a community, a church that loves, you know, freely, that just loves because that's what Jesus told us to do, you know, and that we start learning from people who maybe don't look like us, you know, from women of color, from Black women, from immigrants, from the undocumented dreamer who is dying to go to school, you know, or if you look up, there's so many stories of people who have left everything so that their kids could get an American education. Yeah, you know, like just if anything, it comes down to listening, right? Just listen. It's so easy to always just have an opinion, to always have to have it right. But really, everything is not black and white. And yeah, there's so much to learn from each other. It's not, you know, and I think it's so easy to always think like I'm the one who has to give, but it's like, when you listen, you receive so much, you know, and it's and as a Jesus follower, it's also humility that lets me listen to other people's stories and understand their point of view and in their lives and walk a mile in their shoes, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so that's what I would say.